The name of the controversial Portuguese novelist Jose Saramago may not be widely known, but in less than a quarter of a century, he has gained a reputation as one of the world's most important living writers.
If we ask in Britain to say the name of a Portuguese writer, it's Saramago for sure.
In my opinion, Saramago is one of the greatest novelists in the world nowadays.
In recognition of his achievement, Saramago was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1998. Saramago's writing career has been highly unorthodox. He didn't start writing novels until his mid-50s, because until then, he claimed, he had nothing worth telling. The withdrawal by the Portuguese government of his controversial book, The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, from an important literary prize, led to self-exile on the Spanish island of Lanzarote, and his Nobel Prize was condemned by the Vatican for being awarded to an inveterate communist. Now, with the publication of The Cave, his first novel since winning the Nobel Prize, Jose Saramago has agreed to grant a rare interview. This is Lanzarote Airport, gateway to one of the world's most popular holiday hotspots. But I haven't come to join the crowds of revelling tourists. This is an extraordinarily weird place. I've left behind a ribbon of tourist development on the coast, and already I'm in the middle of nowhere, and the whole process has only taken about 3 minutes. Lanzarote, of course, is volcanic and it's very arid and dusty. One wonders what would bring a writer to live here. I know that Saramago, of course, had some trouble with the church and the Portuguese government, and it may be that coming to a place like this, where he can exile himself stubbornly on a rock, and that would make it a pretty ideal place to come to.
Hola, Mr. Saramago. Bonjour. Très bien. Merci beaucoup.
Saramago started his working life as a mechanic, then trained himself as a draftsman, journalist, and translator. He was in his mid-50s by the time he became a serious novelist. Saramago's first novels tended to be concerned with Portugal, with its history and identity. But since moving to Lanzarote in 1993, his writing has evolved into more universal directions. The focus of his most recent novel is the discovery of Plato's cave beneath a 21st century shopping centre. The Cave is the last part in a loose trilogy that includes Blindness, a shocking examination of what happens when an entire city goes blind, and All the Names, a disturbing and tender epic in which a clerk in a registry office becomes obsessed with finding a woman whose index card he picks up by mistake.
Todos os meus romances partem de algo impossível. É impossível que toda a gente segue ao mesmo tempo. É impossível, de alguma maneira, também o que acontece em todos os nomes. É impossível que a caverna de Platão esteja debaixo de um centro comercial. E, portanto, se não há impossíveis, eu não escrevo romances.
What if Jesus, son of Mary, had written his own account of the New Testament story? This is the impossible premise that the Gospel According to Jesus Christ is based on. And it gave Saramago a particular opportunity to speak with his uniquely humane vitality.
Wide awake, Mary lay on her back, listening and staring into space as if waiting. Joseph furtively approached and slowly drew back the sheet. Meanwhile, Mary had opened her legs, or they had opened by themselves as she dreamed, and remained open. perhaps because of this sudden lassitude, or the mere premonition of a married woman who knows her duty. God, who is omnipresent, was there, but pure spirit that he is, was unable to see how Joseph's skin came into contact with that of Mary, how his flesh penetrated hers, as had been ordained. And perhaps he was not even there when the holy seed of Joseph spilled into the precious womb of Mary, both sacrosanct, being the fount and chalice of life. For in truth, there are things God himself does not understand, even though he created them. Out in the yard, God could neither hear the anguished gasp which escaped Joseph's lips as he experienced an orgasm, nor the gentle moan Mary was unable to repress. Joseph stood in the middle of the room, raised his hands, and looking up at the ceiling, gave the most dire thanksgiving of all which is reserved for men. I thank you, Almighty God, King of the universe, for not having made me a woman.
Since the 1970s, when he fought for the end of the Salazar regime in Portugal, Saramago has been a rebellious figure. But his readiness to be outspoken, both as novelist and commentator, seems not to stem from a desire to draw attention to himself, but from an ingrained sense of justice and morality. His long allegiance to communism informs much of what he does and writes about, though he regards it as part of his genetic, not literary, makeup.
Num tempo como este, em que tudo aconteceu, o Muro de Berlim, Stalin, o Gulag, tudo isso, como é que você consegue continuar a ser comunista? Porque a verdade é que eu continuo a ser comunista. Uma espécie de mecanismo hormonal que faz com que a pessoa seja, em certos aspectos, aquilo que é. Então, digamos que eu transporto dentro de mim uma hormona que faz com que eu não tenha outro remédio, não tenha outra solução, senão ser comunista.
It would be easy to fall into cliché and attribute Saramago's sense of rebellion and resistance to his peasant origins. His roots are in Azinhaga, a small farming community 100 kilometres north of Lisbon. Although his family moved to the capital when he was a few years old, the young José stayed with his grandparents during school holidays and received an education in the differences between city and countryside.
Mas a casa dos avós eram muito pobres, era telha, só coberta com telha, a casa praticamente era terra, não havia casa de banho, era assim que era.
O povo em si, sobretudo no inverno ou nos verões escaldantes, passava fome. E o Saramago, não estando aqui, mas vindo cá, apercebia-se disso. E talvez por isso ele é a pessoa que é hoje.
Eu creio que seria outro se eu tivesse nascido numa grande cidade e tivesse crescido num meio, digamos, urbano, desenvolvido. As pessoas que eu conhecia então conheciam todas as palavras de que necessitavam. E isso é que é extremamente curioso. Mas não conheciam mais. E viviam provavelmente com um número muito limitado de palavras, 3 ou 4 centenas de palavras. Conheciam os nomes dos seus instrumentos de trabalho, conheciam os nomes das árvores, conheciam os nomes dos animais, dos pássaros. Isso sim, essa era a vida deles. E então isso, quando eu escrevo hoje, vem-me desse tempo palavras que não uso hoje, procuro que elas tenham uma utilidade nova.
Even today, Saramago's novels are nourished by his pleasure in the language and stories of his grandfather and the people of the countryside. As a boy, Saramago was frightened of this place because of a story about a huge wooden beam that would appear at night, blocking the road in front of the local chapel. Later in life, Saramago would set the entire Catholic Church against him forever. One of Saramago's most notorious novels is The Gospel According to Jesus Christ, a book that was banned in Portugal for a time. And in it, Jesus wrestles not with the devil, but with a modern, power-hungry God. Now grown up, Jesus is visited by God while out fishing in a boat. He wants to know how he is to fit into God's grand plan.
And what is this part you've reserved for me in your plan? That of martyr, my son. That of victim, which is the best role of all for propagating any faith and stirring up fervour. God uttered the words martyr and victim as if his tongue were made of milk and honey. But Jesus suddenly felt a chill go through his limbs. You promised me power and glory, stammered Jesus. And I intend to keep that promise. But remember our pact. You shall have them after death. What good will it do me to have power and glory when I'm dead? Well, you won't be dead in the absolute sense of the word, for as my son, you'll be with me, or in me. And my death, what will that be like? It is only fitting that a martyr's death should be painful, and, if possible, ignominious, so that believers may be moved to greater fervour and devotion. You will be the spoon I shall dip into humanity and bring out laden with men who shall believe in the new God I intend to become.
There were political consequences and religious consequences, and I think he wanted that. He was not afraid of it. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop, and he wouldn't think wisely about writing such a book in his popularity. But it was really a moment when Portuguese literature had its earthquake.
Soon after it was published in 1991, The Gospel According to Jesus Christ was nominated for entry into the Ariosto Prize, the European Union's literary award. But a few weeks later, Saramago was furious to discover that, under pressure from Catholic factions within the Portuguese government, the novel had been withdrawn from the competition.
There was a discussion in the parliament about this question, and the turmoil that this decision caused was extraordinary because it was the first and the only, at my knowledge, the only measure of censorship that was taken after the Revolution of '74.
Such an act of artistic repression could have been expected in the climate of Antonio Salazar's dictatorship. But The Gospel According to Jesus Christ was published nearly 2 decades after the fall of the Salazar regime, in an atmosphere of supposed freedom and democracy.
He could accept to live in a country where the thought and expression of thoughts is controlled, but he could not accept to go to a country where there is a total freedom. It could be, such a measure could be taken against him.
In 1993, Saramago decided to move to Lanzarote in the Canary Islands.
The fact is that Saramago was not very comfortable in Portugal, also for the fact that he was feeling more and more that he needed to have an international career. And Portugal appeared to Saramago as if it was a very, very small country for his legitimate ambitions. Saramago changed very significantly, not only his way of writing, but especially the themes and the situations of his novels. Maybe this is due for the fact that he himself came to the conclusion that he should write a kind of novel which would be more acceptable by a huge public. His novels are not anymore about the history of the past. They are novels about the history of the future, anticipating situations that we will live in the future and maybe in the near future.
By 1998, Saramago had written 10 acclaimed novels. Just as his writing was evolving and his focus broadening through stories of a world in transition, the former barefoot, sun-blackened boy from Azinhaga was awarded the Nobel Prize, watched with admiration by his wife Pilar.
The fact that Portuguese literature was ignored all along practically one century was a scandal. And so the prize given to Saramago gained a special repercussion due to the fact to be the first one to have the prize. So it was acclaimed in Portugal.
Many people knew Saramago, but had never read any book. They read the novel. We sold between October and December of that year some 300,000 books, about something like that. And this in Portugal is we are 10 million. So.
There was an immense crowd, an enormous crowd that acclaimed him in the streets of Lisbon. It was really a national event.
In many ways, Saramago is still the same journeyman writer and troublesome communist he always was. In personal terms, though, his Nobel Prize has had the effect of focusing the world's attention on everything he says and does.
Imaginemos que eu não seria prémio Nobel. Imaginemos que eu não seria lido, enfim, digamos, mais ou menos em todo o mundo. Eu diria exatamente o mesmo que estou a dizer. A diferença está em que, pelo facto de que eu diga, em 3 minutos dá a volta ao mundo, pois então, digamos, vai ser dito.
It isn't surprising that the publication of The Cave, his first novel since winning the Nobel Prize, was one of the most anticipated literary events of autumn 2002. The Cave sets the traditional ways of village existence against life in a sprawling residential shopping centre in the city. Just as Plato in the 4th century BC used his fable of the cave to show the difference between reality and our perception of it, Saramago's shopping centre stands for a world in which we mistake the appearance of life for real life. In the novel, Cipriano Algor is a village potter who has made his living selling handmade earthenware pottery to an immense shopping centre in the city. But the all-powerful centre has decided that its customers now prefer industrial plastic kitchenware. His livelihood under threat, Cipriano is faced with his deepest fear, being forced to leave the village to live under the protection of the place he despises most of all.
At the end of the avenue, on the towering grey wall blocking the road, he could see an enormous white rectangular poster on which these words were written in letters of a brilliant intense blue. Live in security. Live at the centre. A poster appears there from time to time, repeating the same words. Sometimes they show images of happy families, a 35-year-old husband, a 33-year-old wife, an 11-year-old son, a 9-year-old daughter, and also, but not always, a grandfather or grandmother of indefinite age, with white hair and a few wrinkles, all obliged to smile and reveal their respective sets of teeth, perfect, white, gleaming. Cipriano Algor took the invitation as a bad omen. He could already hear his son-in-law announcing, for the 100th time, that they would all go and live at the centre, as soon as he got his promotion to resident guard.
O livro não pode ser, enfim, eu não gostaria que o livro fosse entendido como uma apologia dos antigos tempos da vida tradicional e uma feroz crítica aos tempos de agora. Se o leitor se colocar aí, quer dizer, não me dá nenhuma satisfação. O que o livro diz, suponho eu, é outra coisa. Não podemos viver como Cipriano Algor. Já não se pode viver assim. Mas não deveria, mas a alternativa, mas o que nos ficou, o caminho por onde metemos e o caminho por onde estamos, não pode ser o do centro.
After a quixotic attempt to save his livelihood by persuading the centre to order a new range of decorative ceramic figurines, the old potter finally accepts that he will have to abandon his pottery and move into the centre with his daughter and son-in-law. Soon after the Al Gore family have installed themselves, however, a rumour begins to circulate of a strange discovery that has been made in the course of excavation work deep under the centre's foundations. Cipriano Al Gore, ever curious, decides to go and find out what is happening for himself.
One of the impressive and rather curious things about A Caverna, the cave, is that you don't find out until a very long way into the novel what the significance of the title is. And then when you do, there's a double shock that not only is this Plato's cave, it's actually a real cave, it's an archaeological find. And then you say to yourself, well, what's it there for? What's the point of it?
Cipriano's plan could not have been simpler. He would go down in the service lift as far as 05, and then abandon himself to fate and to chance. He was not surprised when he found a large open space. One section of a supporting wall had been demolished, and it was through there that one entered.
This is one of many caves on Lanzarote, and probably quite similar to what Plato had in mind when he devised his idea of the cave in Book 7 of the Republic. Now, Plato's cave was only a philosophical idea, but he had a very concrete construction in mind when he devised it. The simple twist in Saramago's tale is to lead his hero, Cipriano, into a real version of Plato's metaphorical cave.
Cipriano Al Gore switched on the torch and set off. There appeared before his eyes what looked like a stone bench, and the following moment a row of vague shapes appeared and disappeared. A violent tremor ran through Cipriano Al Gore's limbs. The tremulous light from his torch swept slowly over the white stone, caught some bits of dark cloth, then moved upwards to reveal a human body sitting there. Beside it, covered in the same dark fabric, were 5 other bodies, all sitting erect, as if a metal spike had been put through their skulls to keep them fixed to the stone.
In Plato's cave was an underground room in which his onlookers would be sitting facing a wall. Behind them, there was a fire burning, which lit up the cave. And between the fire and the onlookers, there was a bridge or a path across which his puppeteers would move objects whose shadows would be reflected onto the wall in front of the onlookers. Whereas they thought they were looking at real objects passing in front of them, what they were actually seeing was just the shadows of those objects. And it's that distinction between real objects and the shadows of those objects which was at the heart of Plato's cave and which is the undercurrent of Jose Saramago's novel.
Meanwhile, Cipriano Al Gore is collecting more evidence about the place he has found himself in.
There's only one thing missing, muttered Cipriano Al Gore. He walked forward a few steps and suddenly stopped. Here it is, he said. There was a large black stain on the ground. The ground was scorched, as if a fire had burned there for a long time. There's no point asking if they existed or not, said Cipriano Al Gore. The proof is here. Each person must draw his own conclusions. I've drawn mine already. You must decide what to do with your own lives, but I'm leaving the center.
It's clear that Cipriano's decision to leave is based on his realization that not only has he been living above Plato's cave, he's been living in its successor.
A alegoria é óbvia, claro, da caverna de Platão, as pessoas sentadas olhando a parede E realmente é uma semelhança verdadeiramente extraordinária. Quer dizer, a realidade converteu-se em imagem e tem sobre o espectador uma influência limitada ao facto de ser a imagem e não a realidade que ela mostra. O comportamento perante a televisão é exatamente este, é exatamente aquele que o Platão desenhou, digamos, no mito da caverna, com as pessoas atadas, olhando as sombras e crendo que as sombras são a realidade.
There's no doubt that Saramago's The Cave holds up the sternest mirror to our times. But the novel is also a tender parable of survival, lightened as well as reinforced by the beauty of Saramago's language and his genius for strokes of irony, as grotesque as they are convincing. The book ends with one of Saramago's greatest strokes of irony. The authorities at the centre transform Plato's cave into the ultimate tourist attraction.
There was a poster, one of those really big ones outside the centre. "Can you guess what it said?" he asked. "We've no idea," they replied. And, as if he were reciting something, he said, "Coming soon. Public opening of Plato's cave. An exclusive attraction. Unique in the world. Buy your ticket. Now."
É verdade que podemos dizer que vivemos numa época de barbárie. Praticamente em todos os aspectos, digamos, da vida humana. Digamos, o Império Romano, quando quis distrair, digamos, as pessoas das preocupações que se supõe que deviam ser as suas, as mais importantes, pois inventou a fórmula pão e circo. Não é? E hoje, adaptada, muito melhorada, evidentemente, a fórmula funciona e com a mesma eficácia com que funcionou antes. Cumplicidade dos próprios meios de comunicação social, os jornais, as televisões, digamos, em geral, que são parte de um mecanismo que eu não quero dizer que tenha sido diabolicamente idealizado, e há de facto uma indiferença hoje, eu creio que sim, que a palavra exata é esta, indiferença de massas humanas em relação aos seus problemas essenciais.
In conversations with Saramago colleagues and family and others, what strikes me most forcefully is that his novels are an instrument of our liberty, a liberty that includes the right to resist conformity, to resist being sold a life at the price of our humanity. Put it another way, to resist barbarism. Always remembering that the point of resistance isn't to win, but to outlast the opposition.